Grief is political. And if this statement makes your shoulders tense up or your stomach be like, oh, I don't know if I want to talk about this, I invite you to pause for a moment and take a breath. Because the statement, grief is political, is not about turning your grief into a weapon. It is about recognizing that decisions about who lives, who dies, who gets support, and who is left behind in our society are decisions that are made in rooms full of politicians and policies and power. Hi there, grief growers, and welcome back to Grief Grower. I am so honored to be here with you, as always. If you have been growing alongside me in my work for a while, hello, welcome back. And if you are new to me and my work, hello for the first time. My name is Shelby Forsythia. I'm a grief coach, two-time author, and the founder of Life After Loss Academy, which is an online course and community that has helped dozens of grieving people stop feeling lost, stuck, broken, and alone in the aftermath of loss, and actually build lives they love from the lives that loss has forced them to live. This includes, of course, not only death-related losses, but also losses like divorce and breakup, major diagnosis, and any other loss that changes your life. Here on the show, we believe that grief is not something to get over, but something to grow with and alongside for the rest of our lives. And that when we stop treating grief like a problem to be solved, and instead of like a part of our lives that's woven into, as my wife would say, the all of the everything, we create really rich and meaningful lives that honor not just the struggles we faced and the memories we've carried and all the people who have gone before, but also who we are becoming. We get to be that sort of bridge between the past and the future. Today on the show, in honor of Pride Month and so many other things that are happening in the United States right now, I am so honored to bring you Grief is Political, one of my hottest takes on grief support. How to participate in activism and be an activist even when your heart is broken. This is something I am so incredibly passionate about because there are so many people in the world who say, I'm not political, politics isn't for me. And I'm like, do you not understand that every single element of your life is driven by politics? We all exist inescapably inside of systems and structures that have been constructed by other people, by politicians, by governments. Oftentimes people we elect to be there, oftentimes people we did not elect to be there for whatever reason. And talking about how grief is political and is informed by politics is something that's really, really close to my heart. Because yes, grief is personal. It is very much a thing that happens to you. You are the one navigating the loss in your life. But just like everything else in your world, grief exists inside of a larger system. Grief is political. And if this statement makes your shoulders tense up or your stomach be like, oh, I don't know if I want to talk about this, I invite you to pause for a moment and take a breath. Because the statement, grief is political, is not about turning your grief into a weapon. It is about recognizing that decisions about who lives, who dies, who gets support, and who is left behind in our society are decisions that are made in rooms full of politicians and policies and power. And if you're grieving, also consider this: your grief, your heartbreak, your loss did not happen in a vacuum. It happened in a society where the rules about who deserves compassion and care and safety and justice are written by people in office, and then theoretically we all abide by them. To be clear, you do not have to have lost somebody to war or hate crime or imprisonment or medical malpractice or poverty, sort of political events, to see grief as a political thing. Regardless of how your person died or even the type of loss that you're facing, because divorce, job loss, natural disaster, these all have political components as well, your grief in some way is mixed up with politics. Simply put, your grief is political. So let's get into it today. Here's what I mean when I say grief is political. When I use the phrase grief is political, I do not mean grief is partisan, and I think that's what a lot of people tend to hear when we talk about grief and politics together. I mean, when I say grief is political, that the systems surrounding death, survival, support, and healing are all built in our society by political choices. I'm going to run through a list of things that I could think of that politics determine in the United States, but if you can think of others, I'd absolutely love to hear from you. And of course, because of where I live, I'm based in the United States, this is just a list, to my knowledge, that encompasses the experience of what it's like to live right here, right now. And I get that politics exists in different iterations, permutations, combinations across the world. So, in the United States, politics determine who gets access to healthcare and who doesn't, which can often be a matter of life and death. This is one of the biggest things that the rest of the world looks at us and be like, you're getting that wrong. Absolutely, I agree. Who is imprisoned or killed by the state, who is put on death row. And this often happens along dividing lines of race or class or ability or gender. Where people live, and whether those neighborhoods are safe or financially resourced or thriving. Politics also decides whose bodies and futures are considered valuable, who has a bright and promising future, and whose are considered disposable or lowlifes. Politics determines how we enter into relationships. I'm thinking things like marriage contracts, business contracts, how separation happens, who gets to initiate those decisions and when and why, and ultimately how things like divorce, whether a romantic relationship or like a business separation, happens, and those are loss events. Politics also determines who is forced to flee war or violence, and who gets to look away because they're not affected. Which communities are most likely to lose loved ones early and often, and which are most likely to live long, happy lives, influenced by politics. How we travel, locally and internationally, and who is considered a risk or a threat at the border. We're seeing this very much right now. Who is most impacted by changes in climate and how those changes are managed? Are we funneling money towards these people who have been devastated, or are we not? Are we telling our constituents that these events are real or not? How we distribute information about both historical and current events. I'm thinking about history editing or media censoring. Who has decision-making power when we die, and when and where, and how those decisions can be made. And finally, regardless of which of these on the list rung true for you, politics determines how you're allowed to grieve. Because here's the thing, in the United States, there is no federal right to bereavement leave at the time of recording this podcast. Most workers, full-time, part-time, across the board, are expected to return to their jobs days or even hours, or after no gap at all, after experiencing an unimaginable loss. Whether you get time to mourn depends not just on your employer, but on local and state policy, which often excludes families that are not nuclear, so people who are like family to you or aren't in your immediate household aren't counted, deaths that aren't considered close, and losses that do not follow a traditional narrative. And that's just for human death-related losses. As the recording of this podcast, again, there is no national policy not only for death losses, but also for non-death losses, such as something like a divorce, a major diagnosis that changes your life, where you'd like a couple days to sit and think about how that's changing your future, but also things like pet loss or natural disaster. If your grief has ever been dismissed or overlooked or legislated out of legitimacy, you already know that your grief is political. And if the phrase grief is political, or the idea grief is political, is a new perspective to you, that's okay too. I'm really glad you're here, and I'm really glad you're listening today. Take care as you navigate what may be a very big cascade of emotions, because widening your view of grief and how it shows up in your life and all the ways you've been impacted by it can bring up everything from anger to devastation to shock to despair. Even just seeing grief differently, not even doing anything yet, but just seeing grief differently requires energy when you're grieving. In other words, it is okay if this feels big, because it is. I want to transition a little bit into how to begin thinking about grief and politics now that you've started seeing Let's transition into thinking. How are we thinking about grief and politics? One of the best ways that you can engage with the grief that is entangled in politics and the politics that are entangled in grief is by asking questions about your own grief experience. You might start by considering, 1, how was my loss political? 2, what societal systems or structures had an impact on my grief, positive or negative? There can be positive legislation that influences your grief. I'm thinking things like caregiver mandates or things like that, or the fact that hospice is often funded by the government. Like, that's a real thing. That can positively affect your grief. Third question, who, besides my friends and family, might have made decisions about my grief experience? I'm thinking politicians in rooms deciding how things are going to go for the rest of us. So I want to give you an example here. These are just a few ways that I might apply these questions and see and think about my mom's death through a political lens. And if you're new here, my mom died from breast cancer suddenly in 2013, a recurrence of breast cancer. Here's one lens I could see this through. Breast cancer research is publicly funded a lot of the time with taxpayer dollars that I pay, you pay, we pay to the government, and requires organizations and nonprofits to lobby politicians and say, hey, this is important. Finding a cure, getting good treatment is important. So politicians and people inside the science and research systems in our society, as my mom was dying and as she was being treated, were making decisions about whether or not my mom's specific type of cancer mattered and whether or not learning about it was worth funding. Here's another lens. Throughout her diagnosis, treatment, and death, she was cared for by a team of professionals from Duke University Hospital. Hospitals, I have learned, can be privately or publicly owned, i.e., privately by themselves or publicly by the government or a social system. They can be for-profit, as in they're making money for shareholders, or not-for-profit, as in all the money goes back to sustaining the hospital. I learned that Duke Hospital, where my mom was, this is 11 years later? Yeah, 11 years later. That Duke Hospital, where she was, is a privately owned, not-for-profit hospital, which means it's tax exempt, and in an ideal world exists with the intention of getting people quality care instead of trying to make a profit so that shareholders get richer. Cool. Politicians and people inside the healthcare system, including insurance companies, were making decisions about what sorts of treatments my mom should receive, how many procedures they should try before telling her there was nothing more they could do, how much to charge for those services, and who to hire as doctors, nurses, chaplains, support staff, and, finally, where the line was between treating the disease and telling her there's nothing more you can do, you should call in hospice. A third lens for you. My mom died at home, and her body was removed by workers from our local funeral home. Politicians and people inside the death care system, that's another system in our society, were making decisions about how long her body could be with us and how and where it was allowed to be honored after her death. Byproduct of politics, capitalism, white supremacy, a bunch of all these things, determine burial laws, cremation laws, what options are available for you in your state. And unfortunately right now they're state specific, and so it kind of depends on where you go. But things like medical aid in dying are also state specific and governed by state and local governments. Something to think about. Fourth and final lens for you. When my mom died, I was 21 years old and on winter break from college, so I did not consider something like bereavement leave. I wasn't working. Well, I was working actually, now that you mention it, you out there. Now that you mention it, I was working, but I was on winter break. So I had about a week and a half before I had to go back to school again. But I did return to a college campus that had no system in place for supporting grieving students explicitly beyond meeting with an intern therapist who was still in grad school. I went to a few therapy sessions and I had the sense that my grief was overwhelming to them, and I left. After just a few sessions. The college I attended, Appalachian State University, is publicly funded, meaning everything from choices about our football team to our mental health programs were likely influenced by the desires of politicians at the state and federal levels. Politicians and people inside the education system, another system that was impacting me, were making decisions about how much the mental and emotional health of students mattered, when and how to serve bereaved students, and where funding for the counseling center fit in alongside all of the university's other expenses. That is political. So as you can see, these are just 4 lenses. There are so many other lenses of grief and politics that I can apply to my mother's death, not to mention my best friend's death, even my cat's death. My statements about the intersection of grief and politics, for the most part, are not partisan. I'm not disparaging one side of the aisle while praising the other. They are simply acknowledging that within the small, intimate experience of my personal grief, my mom's death, a larger influence was at play, constantly making consequential decisions about how my grief was going to go in the background. And my loss, just like your loss, took place inside of this bigger system of politics. So, when you understand that politics and grief are connected, your next question might be, how the heck do I get involved? We've seen it, we've thought about it, considered it, held weight, asked some questions. Now I want to do something. So when you have this understanding that politics and grief are inexplicably intertwined, it is very, very tempting to jump right into the deep end and sign yourself up as a volunteer for everything in your community or subscribe yourself to every possible social media account doing justice work. Suddenly, political activism can become your other full-time job, and your inbox is just like inundated with reminders of how bad things are and how you are a necessary and crucial part of making the world a better place. That's a lot of pressure, and that's a fast track to not only activist burnout, which is a real thing, but grief burnout as well. So as you tend to your mind, body, heart, and spirit while grieving, consider these questions as a guide to get started as you move into this doing space of grief and politics. Number 1, what 1 to 3 issues break my heart the most? Prioritizing really what aggravates you or tears you to pieces inside can help you prioritize where to begin, because there's a lot of ways to be an activist and there are a lot of causes to consider. So thinking about how you wish things could have gone differently with your own loss, or how you could contribute to making future grievers' lives a little bit easier, is a great way to begin. For example, one client of mine lost her transgender daughter to suicide, and she is now passionate about supporting organizations that help LGBTQIA+ folks feel seen and heard and included, not just on an emotional level, but on a legislative one, writing laws and codifying laws that make it so queer people are included everywhere. Another client of mine who suffered the loss of a baby chose to turn her activism and advocacy into becoming a spokesperson for the hospital where she received incredible empathetic care. And so she's kind of a champion for this healthcare system now in her area because she believes in it so much. Question number 2, what is a reasonable amount of time, energy, or money I can contribute to this cause? And this is where I'm going to encourage you to be super hyper duper realistic. If you are paying off funeral costs or medical debt, both of which are political, or if you're fighting someone in court, also political, you may not have the financial means to support political causes, and that's okay. The tables might be turned if you just received a huge inheritance from someone who died, or if you downsized your home, and by consequence, probably your mortgage payments, after a loss. And I'll say that money is just one aspect of contributing to activism, considering how much time you might have to volunteer, make phone calls, send letters on behalf of a cause is another way to go. You may also have special skills, things like meal planning, graphic design, social media and marketing, or first aid are really valuable for organizations that participate in some form of political activism. And as many in-person demonstrators will tell you, sometimes simply showing up with your body during a march or a rally is a great way to send a political message, because by showing up with your body in that space, you are contributing to a cause's literal numbers that eventually influence change. It's one thing when 10 people show up. It's another when 100 people show up, or 1,000, or 10,000, or 100,000 for some sort of march or movement. So even if your activism is not a small daily thing, it can be, it doesn't have to be. Even if you attend 2 rallies a year, 6 rallies a year, however many your nervous system can reasonably handle and in ways that keep you and the others around you safe, that is a very tangible way to say, I may not have money, I may not have a lot of time to give. If these are happening on the weekends, I can get out of my day job, whatever the case may be, and I can just show up and be a body who says, I believe in this cause. That is a very, very valuable thing to do when you have no other options or minimal other options for contributing consistently while you're grieving. Next question here for you. Can I join a movement already in progress? And this is about so many grievers I work with think about or talk about wanting to start some sort of charity or organization after a loved one dies. And something that I gently encourage is maybe you could see what else exists out there first, because starting a charity or a company, unless you have a lot of support, is a lot of work. And I'll tell you that a lot of my clients have decided, wow, this is not for me. Like, I have gotten in and I have seen everything that is here to be built, and putting energy toward building something that big is not for me right now. And of course you're welcome to come back to it later. Of course you're welcome to partner together with other people who may have more energy to make it happen. Of course you're allowed to do all of these things. But if you're feeling this call to like plant your grief flag in the ground and be like, I'm standing up for this on behalf of my grief, participate in activism in causes or organizations that already exist. As Walter Payton said, we are stronger together than we are alone. And many organizations band together over a shared identity or a shared cause. I'm thinking of things like Moms Demand Action, which seeks to end gun violence in the United States, or Doctors Without Borders, which is a worldwide organization that provides medical care for people in war or crisis. And you could begin your activism journey by heading to or signing up for a group that already exists but shares your same values. You get to show up and have a voice in a larger movement without having to worry about things like fundraising or payroll or marketing or rent, and basically running a business. And that can be a real relief when you're grieving, because not everybody wants to start what amounts to a business when you're grieving. Last question here for you before you move into action. How will I know this type of activism is right for me? How do I know this is good? How do I know this is worth my time, energy, money, all the other precious resources I have while grieving? I want you to picture how you'd like to feel after you've begun engaging in activism work. Because politics, like grief, is never really finished. We're never really done with it. Consider how you'd like to feel, mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, after you've begun. Of course, like with anything else, there will be moments of heartache and despair, and oh my God, I can't believe we are making progress this slowly or sliding backwards. This can be true in grief as well. But by and large, many people who call themselves activists say that they want to feel like they are taking on their fair share of responsibility to better their communities, or leaving a legacy, or building connections with others who share their values, or meeting their neighbors, or having greater empathy for the human race. You may want to feel more hope or more power to change things that are broken, or simply a sense that you're doing the right thing in the world. So before you take any sort of action, before you sign up for a newsletter, before you attend a rally, consider, how would I like to feel? Not necessarily when I come out of this, because it will never really be done. How would I like to feel as I'm doing this, or as I'm decompressing from this event, or as the years go on? How would I like to feel? Lastly, here on Grief Grower, I want to give you 6 extraordinarily easy ways to engage in grief-centered activism, especially if you have very little energy or time or money. The first one is to start by asking grief-informed questions. And we kind of covered this already in like seeing your grief through different lenses, and like thinking about your grief, and then considering all the ways that you would like to do grief out in the world. But asking questions as an action is another way to be an activist. And this is a free thing to do, because grief activism doesn't always look like shouting from the rooftops or marching physically in a protest. Sometimes it looks like an intimate conversation that you have with somebody over dinner, or just a post on social media. Did you know there's no legal bereavement leave in most United States? Isn't that interesting? Let's talk about it. Or, I've been emailing my reps about insert issue here. Have you ever emailed a representative about a cause? I would love to hear your story. Even just normalizing conversations like this in day-to-day life. I'm donating to this group in memory of John. Would you like to hear about him? Normalizing that engaging in politics is a worthwhile way to cope with grief, to tend to grief, to grow through grief, is a really wonderful first step in doing grief activism out in the world. Number 2 is my all-time favorite, which is why I included it immediately after 1, and it's something called ResistBot. So using ResistBot to text your representatives. This is a great way to be a grief activist, because if you can send or respond to a text message, you can take political action. And some days, I'll admit, this is all I have time for. ResistBot is free It's a free service, unless you have messaging costs for your phone. I know a lot of phone plans don't have that anymore. It's like you pay something a month and then you have your data. But for the most part, it's a free service that, unless you are charged per text message, which I don't think anybody does that anymore, it is essentially free. There is no charge to use ResistBot. It lets you email your elected officials directly using pre-written letters about current issues. So all you have to do to get started is text the word resist, RESIST, to 50409 and follow the prompts that it gives you. It basically says, like, what would you like to resist, or what would you like to send your representatives? And then you can select a pre-written letter that you can tweak or edit or add your own thoughts or your own grief story if you want. You confirm your current zip code so it knows who to send it to. It's usually local or state representatives as opposed to federal. And then you confirm by text message that you would like ResistBot to send an email on your behalf. You do not have to open your mail app. You do not have to type an email yourself. And it is so incredible. It's not even copy paste. It's like we've written what amounts to a form letter for you, and they're crowdsourced from other people who have the same values that you do, and you can choose what issues you're passionate about. And then you say, I would like to resist, and it composes this little message, and it's like, are you ready to send this to your representatives? And it's just one of my favorite things. It's activism for the exhausted, and it matters. It matters. I get results from it. I have been using ResistBot since 2016. This is not an ad, by the way. I just love it so much. I've been using ResistBot since 2016 to share my opinion with my representatives in Illinois here, and many times I have even gotten emailed replies from their offices, which is really fun to see, like, oh my God, it's actually doing something, because just like other forms of communication to representatives, emails get counted. If they get a lot of postcards or a lot of emails or a lot of phone calls, there are people in their offices whose entire jobs are to tally the letters or notices or outcries they get about specific issues, and that can inform how they vote on things in the future. This leads me to my third one, which is an app called 5 Calls, and it gives you easy, scripted advocacy. The only difference between this one and ResistBot is you do have to make a phone call. So if you want to take it a step further and you're like, I'm good at phone calls, I don't mind talking on the phone, 5 Calls is a wonderful app that does everything hard about advocacy for you. It gives you put in your zip code again, it gives you phone numbers for your local, state, and federal representatives. It gives you scripts based on issues that are current. It's updated every week. And then it gives you language to read over the phone word for word, so that when somebody from your representative office picks up the phone, you start talking. You say, hi, my name is this, I live at this address, or I live within this zip code, and I'm passionate about this issue, and then you just read the whole script, and you can hang up if you want. Again, you can add your own personal grief story if you want. And I learned in my research, I was like, why is it called 5 Calls? It's called 5 Calls because the creators of the app say 5 calls feels like a manageable amount for most people. But I'll say, as your friendly local grief coach, even if you only make 1 call through this app, 1 call a day, 1 call a week, 1 call a month, you're making a difference. You do not have to find the right words. It's my favorite part of this app. You just have to read the screen as you call. And you can absolutely add your own perspective, your grief story again, if you want, but it's not required. And something that's really neat about 5 Calls is that elected officials, local, state, federal, often report that high call volume about an issue is often their reason for voting for something, especially if it goes against party lines. And so it's like all these Republicans are voting for this thing, we want Danny Q to come along for the ride. If Danny gets a lot of calls against this issue from people who live in his area and who elected him and say, hey, we don't want this to go through, Danny can say, I voted against this, against my party, against this big group that I'm a part of, because I was inundated with calls who said they didn't want this to happen. It's a very valid reason for a politician to make a tough political decision to say, the people who I'm in charge of representing didn't want this. And if you want to think of this another way, making phone calls to politicians, I'll sum up one of my favorite authors and podcasters. Her name is Tori Dunlap, and she hosts a show and has written a book called Financial Feminist. She says, essentially, your representatives are working for you. You're not bothering them by making a phone call. You're their boss. You are their boss. It is literally in their job description to make you, their constituent, happy, or to represent you adequately. That is literally their job description as a politician. They're not there to make money and shake hands and do deals and show up for dinners or do photo ops at the local grocery store when a new one opens. They are there to represent you and to help you build the community and the neighborhood and the government of your dreams. I know that sounds like fluffy unicorns, but they exist to represent you and the things that you want. So tell them what you want, because if they're not hearing from you, they may not know. And that's a hard thing, I know, to hear as a grieving person, is like, I got to do another thing. I got to advocate for myself another way, because often grieving people are the teachers of our loss to other people. We already have to tell our friends and family what we need. We have to do it with politicians too. What it can be, though, if you choose to see it this way, is exercising that resilience muscle of asking for what you need and what you want over and over and over again. Okay, number 4 is write a postcard. There is something so wonderful and kind of old school about putting pen to paper, especially when it comes to grief activism, and postcards let you write directly to legislators or to voters. And this I love, especially for grievers who might be older or grievers who are so tired of looking at technology, which I think all of us are so tired of looking at screens these days, is to get off the screen, write some shit down on a postcard and mail it to somebody. You can do this a few different ways. You can join campaigns or things that are called postcard parties in your neighborhood or local government that send postcards to voters. You could write to your representatives about grief-related policy, so their addresses are publicly posted. You can email your alderperson or your governor or your mayor, or you can even write a letter to the president if you want, and they will receive it. They may not always reply, but they will receive it and count it as something, especially if you name a specific issue, it will go into a tally. Or you can help local organizations get the word out about specific causes or events. A lot of spaces and organizations will be like, we need to let the neighborhood know that this thing is happening. Can you come write, 20 postcards in an afternoon with us? This is a very, very low pressure and creative way to be engaged in grief activism. And the bonus is you don't have to leave your house. You can get your colored pencils and your fancy pens and their stamps that have Betty White's face on them, which I just bought from the U.S. Postal Service, and put them on all your postcards and feel very good about yourself for participating in something that moves some sort of needle forward, that contributes to something greater than yourself. Okay, number 5 is to connect with a local mutual aid group. And if you've never heard the term mutual aid before, it's kind of going around social media in a few spaces, but it's not, I don't think it's quite reached public consciousness all the way yet. Here's a quick definition. Mutual aid is a form of community support where people help each other directly without waiting for institutions or charities. So an example of mutual aid for a lot of people are local buy nothing groups, B-U-Y, buy nothing, as in you are purchasing nothing. I'm a member of one here in Chicago, and people will just say, we upgraded our toaster and now we have a perfectly good toaster that we want to give to a neighbor in need, and different people will comment and then set up a time to exchange the toaster with no money changing hands, and also without the toaster having to go through Goodwill or Salvation Army or a local thrift store in order for someone else to buy it with money. And so a mutual aid group in your area might have different causes. A lot of them are sort of all-purpose mutual aid groups. It's like, we represent this neighborhood, and then everything that this neighborhood needs we make happen. But a lot of other mutual aid organizations are cause or genre specific, and so they might look like sharing meals with neighbors or helping cook for people. It might look like going to where unhoused people are camping or living together and distributing hygiene kits or helping them find places to eat or be safe or shower. It might be providing childcare or transportation to grieving families or people who are receiving medical treatment. A lot of folks in my local Buy Nothing group are looking for a ride to cancer care, to chemotherapy is a very common request, or to a blood draw, something where it's helpful if you're not the person driving afterwards. It might be looking at donating medical supplies or money or time. And something I love about mutual aid is it sends the message that your pain matters and your survival matters, and that as a neighborhood, we can take care of us. It's a really beautiful message, especially if you're looking for ways now to kind of, again, disengage from the screen and from social media and to meet the people that you are surrounded by. I will say most cities and towns have mutual aid groups you can find. You can look for them on social media by just searching your neighborhood or your town name and then mutual aid, or there is a website called mutualaidhub.org that you can search for a mutual aid fund near you as well. Okay, last one here, number 6. I put money last because not everybody has it, but if you want to, you could make a donation that honors your grief. And I will say, I know not everybody has a lot of money to spare, but you don't need to have a ton of money to make a meaningful contribution. If you have $5 or $10, that donation, especially in the name of somebody that you've lost, can be its own act of political resistance. You can do it one time, you can do it recurring, whatever is possible for you. You could give to organizations that are grief specific. There's one I love called Evermore, which is a nonprofit here in the States working to shift policy around grief, specifically getting bereavement leave for everybody after a loss. You could also donate to your local grief support charity or a hospice, as oftentimes organizations like those are underfunded even when they are funded by the government. I will say, I think a lot of grieving people suspect or think or believe that because they are grieving, they cannot also participate in politics. It is not possible to do both or be both at the same time. You cannot be grieving and political at the same time. And I'll say, kind of no matter what, whether you like it or not, whether you see yourself this way or not, you are grieving and political all at once. You are both truths in the same body. And I will also say the fact that you are grieving is not a blocker or a barrier to activism. Having a broken heart can be your biggest political asset, because grief has this awful and beautiful way of cracking us open, of making us see heartbreak and injustice and power and systems more clearly. It gives us a real perspective shift, whether we want it or not. It's a real slap in the face to be a grieving person in the world as it is right now. So if your loss has started this like fire in your belly for something's got to change, something's got to give, it can't be this forever and ever and ever, or kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum, a deeper longing, like this aching for a better world, listen to that. Because that is your grief asking you, please take action on my behalf. And once again, just in case you need to hear it, you do not need to be completely healed from your loss in order to do something. Heartbreak is not a barrier to you being an activist. Activism is full of people whose hearts are overflowing with pain and also with hope that things can get better. Grief is political, and you can be an activist while brokenhearted. You do not need to shout it from the rooftops with a megaphone or hold up a protest sign unless that feels good to you. You do not need to run for office or organize your entire city or start a charity or a nonprofit in your loved one's name. Again, unless that feels good to you. You just need to care. And I know that if you're listening to the show, you already do. And you also need to be willing to take one small step in the direction of the change that you want to make in your community and the world. I get that the world is heavy. I, like you, get reminders of it every single day. I get that you're exhausted. I am also exhausted. But I also know that some part of you senses that your grief is more than the one loss that happened to you or the handful of losses that happened to you. Your grief and your losses are structural and systemic. They're involved in something greater. And you want to do something about it. So with all the tools I provided here in this episode, consider this your invitation to begin. That's all for this episode of Grief Grower. Thank you so very much for joining me today. If you're looking for grief support beyond the show, you can find workshops, blog articles, and my signature What's Your Grief Support Style quiz all for free at shelbyforsythia.com/links. If this podcast felt validating, comforting, educational, or otherwise helpful to you, please subscribe and leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And be sure to share Grief Grower with a friend, because you never know what someone you love is going through. A huge thank you to the Grief Growers community for supporting the show on Patreon. If you'd like to join and help me keep the show free from ads for mattresses and meal delivery kits, because grief is hard enough without commercials, head to patreon.com/shelbyforsythia. As a Patreon supporter, you get to help me choose new topics and guests for the show, and you're the first one to get behind-the-scenes access to all of my upcoming projects, like my book, which is coming out in March 2026. Grief Growers hosted by yours truly, Shelby Forsythia, and our theme music is composed by Eddie Goldstein. Until next time, I see you. I am so freaking proud of you and the work you're doing in the world. And I love you. Because even through grief, we are growing.